Oh my goodness. Can you hear me? Am I live? You can hear me or you can't hear me? Okay, amazing. Sorry that took so long. This is all a little bit new to me. Um, I need to. I'm going to have to leave you for just a couple of minutes. I'll put you on hold, and then I will be back, and we will chat some, and then we'll get amongst some whiskey and a bit of Edgar Allan Poe. Yay! Happy birthday! Thank you. All right, just give me like 5 minutes. I'll be right back. Sorry. All right. Return of the Mac. Oh no, you have to leave in 10 minutes. I'm sorry. Um, how is everybody? Happy birthday. Thank you very much. And I'm gonna crack into the whiskey. Just a bit of utility whiskey here, nothing too fancy. And I've got myself a beer as well. Happy birthday to me. So many happy birthdays. Red label, black label's good, yeah, but they didn't have any, so I had to go for the red label. I didn't fancy the Irish tonight. So we went for a bit of utility whiskey. Yeah, sorry. We had some issues. Got to work this out. Trying to do it from the laptop, and so many happy birthday greetings. Thank you. Cheers. Ooh. How old am I? I am 48. Fine years old. About halfway through, let's say. You never know. Got some pistachios. Sorry, I'm eating as well. Haven't had any dinner. 28. I am. Yeah, I'm looking great. 3 apples old. That's it. I don't look a day over 12. I didn't. I definitely wasn't growing this when I was 12. That's for sure. I was a late starter. Got the Evil Gang badge on, by the way. Although I will be taking these off because it's a bit too warm in here. What's for supper? I don't know yet. Possibly just pizza at this rate because it's getting a bit late. Oh, happy birthday to you too, Hazel Shakes, tomorrow. This is pretty cool. What is slow mode? I didn't even know what does slow mode mean. Does that mean I get a chance to look at it all? How does that work? Oh no, that's fine. Pose shirt. No, it's not a pose shirt. This is a Zimmerman English Theatre shirt, actually. Oh, so I've got the microphone now. Yada Zimmerman, if you don't know the famous Yada Zimmerman. Happy early birthday. Yeah, that's all right. Zimmerman shouts out, lolly, yeah, exactly. Keeps freezing. Oh no. Well, I mean, lucky you to get a beach walk in. That'd be pretty cool. Been a while since I got to the beach. Yada Zimmerman is always listening. Good health, happiness, success, whatever you want to do. You're not old, you're just vintage. Vintage. That's right. Thank you, Rat Eye Girls. Of course I remember you. Well, she's a black screen. Oh no. It's fucking dark. Can you not see my face? It's my face. I'm doing the best I can. I'm in a little sound booth here with LED lights, and that's about all I got. So, because my camera's vertical, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to turn the phone sideways? Would that be better? I don't know if that would work, because then you just, what happens? Then I go sideways. Look, I'm not very tech savvy. We'll work it out for next time. It's going to get better. Turn it back. Turn it back. No. That is rotating us. Yes, for the love I have for you, in turn you will get some. No, I'm kidding. Like Tom, like father, like son. Yeah, that's it. We're of a generation, frankly, actually, which I find the most amusing is that we're not far off the same age, I believe. Mike spikes when you raise your voice. Okay. Well, we won't be doing much raising of voices, I think. Sorry. Tell you what, I'll move it down. It's a new microphone. I got these for my birthday. All very new. It's very exciting. And I'm sure there's probably somewhere our settings, but I don't know where, and especially not on my phone, because I'm doing it through the phone right now. Yeah. So the plan is I'm going to read some Edgar Allan Poe, and I believe I was looking this up just to make. Oh, shite! Oh, see, I told you I'm not very good at this. I bought a massive tome, and I've wrapped it in paper because apparently I can't let you see the sleeve for copyright reasons. And I also have to, I think I'm obliged to say, hefty. I know, it's a massive brick, she said. And I believe crinkle ASMR. And now the nut in the back of the throat. And we're not doing it all today, don't worry. Yeah, it is like the first time the Tom, I guess. So what's in the throat? I stupidly ate a pistachio. Should have just stuck to the liquids. Oh, beer as well. Well, who would have thought? Ooh. There we go. Cheers. So I'm apparently obliged to say also that the edition that I'm reading from was in public domain, and does come from a publication which, if I read any of the other parts, would be breaking copyright infringement. But the text itself is Edgar Allan Poe's original, including the typeset, and therefore I am not in, as far as I understand it, any copyright infringement. So those are the obligatories. You're on a work call? Well, tell them to get stuffed, Alison. Twitch won't take it down. That's right. That's the plan. 2 p.m. Well, it's time for a nap then, isn't it? El Kenan. That's all right. Bit of Poe for some nice late afternoon nappage and some good dreams. Set you up for the evening. Nap time. So I don't quite know what to expect because I'll be honest with you, I know there's a few Edgar Allan Poe fans, and you're going to be disappointed to hear that I have not read much Edgar Allan Poe. I'm of course familiar with his work, and I think actually what we'll do next time is we'll talk a little bit about him, because I got into his past a little bit, and it seemed like he had a pretty. I'm going to read all of them, which run the mask of. It is in here, but it is story 17, and we will do them in sequence as they come. And so that's how we're going to do it. We're going to read the whole of Edgar Allan Poe, not tonight, in this collection of works, which is a collection of tales and also poems. So what I think we might do is just read a story and then maybe read a poem and then go back to a story and see how the time lets us get on. Would be the plan. We can go down to this reading voice. Maybe not. I have hot chocolate and a blanket. Jules Verne was a big fan of Poe, was he really? And surprised and confused. Well, okay. Sorry, everyone, I kick when I'm sleeping. We'll give you wide berth and bone on TV. Bone on TV. Am I saying that right? What's my favourite book of all time? Oh, I don't like these questions because there's so many things I like. There's a kid's book I read. It's called The Cold Moon, which is a story about a bunch of animals that are escaping across the countryside, and it's stuck with me for a very long time just because of the camaraderie. But it's painted as from the perspective of badgers and frogs and rabbits and stuff, and the diggers are coming in, and it was very dramatic. And I love that. I also like pulp. I like detective stories. I don't know. Favorite book? I mean, you can't lose with Lord of the Rings, really. It took me 3 attempts to get at it, though. I think I was just too young. I never could get past that point before they meet Strider. You know what I mean? It's like 250 pages of just hobbits being very boring, and then afterwards I got it because it's like that's their life. They're quiet little creatures and they're happy, and then suddenly they meet this guy and it gets very horrible and dangerous, and they don't even know if they're going to get home again. Beautiful. Um, yeah, Lord of the Rings is amazing, and I would read that, but that is definitely not out of copyright. So let us begin. I cannot read the introduction because that is new. Um, so, are we ready? And by the way, I haven't read this beforehand, so if there's a few stumbles here and there, you'll have to forgive me. And I had a bookmark which will help me keep track. Where is that gone? Oh dear, there it is. I'm just picking up Shakespeare and Sons in Prague. The bookstop. I don't get a kickback. I just like them. The unparalleled adventure of one Hans Pfahl. With a heart of furious fancies, whereof I am commander, with a burning spear and a horse of air, to the wilderness I wander. Tom Bedlam's Song. By late accounts from Rotterdam, the city seems to be in a high state of philosophical excitement. Indeed, phenomena have there occurred of a nature so completely unexpected, so entirely novel, so entirely at variance with preconceived opinions, as to leave no doubt in my mind that long ere this all Europe is in an uproar, all physics in a ferment, all reason and astronomy together by the ears. It appears that on the 7th day of the 7th month, I am not positive about the date, it's left blank here, a vast crowd of people, for purposes not specifically mentioned, were assembled in the great square of the Exchange in the well-conditioned city of Rotterdam. The day was warm, unusually so for the season. There was hardly a breath of air stirring, and the multitude were in no bad humour now and then being besprinkled with friendly showers of a momentary duration, that fell from large white masses of cloud profusely distributed about the blue vault of the firmament. Nevertheless, about noon a slight but remarkable agitation became apparent in the assembly. The clattering of 10,000 tongues succeeded, and in an instant afterward 10,000 faces were upturned toward the heavens. 10,000 pipes descended simultaneously. There's that nut again. Bastard. And in an instant afterward 10,000 faces were upturned towards the heavens. 10,000 pipes descended simultaneously from the corners of 10,000 mouths, and a shout which could be compared to nothing but the I should have learned this by now as a professional voiceover artist, that you don't eat nuts before a recording. We'll go back, shall we? Is Dunny here as well? Whoop whoop. We'll go back to nevertheless. About noon a slight but remarkable agitation became apparent in the assembly. The clattering of 10,000 tongues succeeded, and in an instant afterward 10,000 faces were upturned towards the heavens. 10,000 pipes descended simultaneously from the corners of 10,000 mouths, and a shout which could be compared to nothing but the roaring of Niagara resounded long, loudly, and furiously through all the city and through all the environs of Rotterdam. The origin of this hubbub soon became sufficiently evident. From behind the huge bulk of one of those sharply defined masses of cloud already mentioned, was seen slowly to emerge into an open area of blue space, a queer, heterogeneous, but apparently solid substance, so oddly shaped, so whimsically put together, as not to be in any manner comprehended, and never to be sufficiently admired by the host of sturdy burghers who stood open-mouthed below. What could it be? In the name of all the devils of Rotterdam, what could it possibly portend? No one knew, no one could imagine. Not, not even the burgomaster Menheer Superbus von Erdendunk had the slightest clue by which to unravel the mystery. So as nothing more reasonable could be done, everyone to a man replaced his pipe carefully in the corner of his mouth, and maintaining an eye steadily upon the phenomenon, puffed, paused, waddled about, and grunted significantly, then waddled back, grunted, paused, and finally puffed again. In the meantime, however, lower and lower still toward the goodly city came the object of so much curiosity and the cause of so much smoke. In a very few minutes it arrived near enough to be accurately discerned. It appeared to be, yes, it was undoubtedly a species of balloon, but surely no such balloon had ever been seen in Rotterdam before. For who, let me ask, ever heard of a balloon manufactured entirely of dirty newspapers? No man in Holland, certainly. Yet here, under the very noses of the people, or rather at some distance above their noses, was the identical thing in question, and composed, I have it on the very best authority, of the precise material which no one had ever before known to be used for a similar purpose. It was an egregious insult to the good sense of the burghers of Rotterdam. As to the shape of the phenomenon, it was even still more reprehensible, being little or nothing better than a huge fool's cap turned upside down. And this similitude was regarded as by no means lessened when, upon nearer inspection, the crowd saw a large tassel depending from its apex, and around the upper rim or base of the cone, a circle of little instruments resembling sheep bells, which kept up a continual tinkling to the tune of Betty Martin, but still worse. Suspended by blue ribbons to the end of this fantastic machine, there hung, by way of a car, an enormous drab beaver hat, with a brim superlatively broad, and a hemispherical crown with a black band and a silver buckle. It is, however, somewhat remarkable that many citizens of Rotterdam swore to having seen the same hat repeatedly before, and indeed the whole assembly seemed to regard it with eyes of familiarity. While the Vrouw Gretel Pfaal, upon the sight of it, uttered an exclamation of joyful surprise, and declared it to be the identical hat of her good man himself. Now, this was a circumstance to be more observed, as Pfaal, with 3 companions, had actually disappeared from Rotterdam about 5 years before, in a very sudden and unaccountable manner, and up to the date of this narrative, all attempts at obtaining intelligence concerning them had failed. To be sure, some bones, which were thought to be human, mixed up with a quantity of odd-looking rubbish, had been lately discovered in a retired situation to the east of the city, and some people went so far as to imagine that in this spot a foul murder had been committed, and that the sufferers were in all probability Hans Pfaal and his associates. But to return. The balloon, for no such doubt it was, had now descended to within 100 feet of the earth, allowing the crowd below a sufficiently distinct view of the person of its occupant. This was, in truth, a very singular somebody. He could not have been more than 2 feet in height, but this altitude, little as it was, would have been sufficient to destroy his equilibrium and tilt him over the edge of his tiny car, but for the intervention of a circular rim reaching as high as the breast and rigged on to the cords of the balloon. The body of that little man was more than proportionately broad, giving to his entire figure a rotundity highly absurd. His feet, of course, could not be seen at all. His hands were enormously large. His hair was grey, and collected into a queue behind. His nose was prodigiously long, crooked, and inflammatory. His eyes, full, brilliant, and acute, his chin and cheeks, although wrinkled with age, were broad, puffy, and double. But of ears of any kind there was not a semblance to be discovered upon any portion of his head. This odd little gentleman was dressed in a loose surtout of sky-blue satin, with tight breeches to match, fastened with silver buckles at the knee. His vest was of some bright yellow material, a white taffety cap was set jauntily on one side of his head, and to complete his equipment, a blood-red silk handkerchief enveloped his throat, and fell down, in a dainty manner, upon his bosom, in a fantastic bowknot of supereminent dimensions. Having descended, as I said before, to about 100 feet from the surface of the earth, the little old gentleman was suddenly seized with a fit of trepidation, and appeared disinclined to make any nearer approach to the terra firma. Throwing out, therefore, a quantity of sand from a canvas bag, which he lifted with great difficulty, he became stationary in an instant. He then proceeded, in a hurried and agitated manner, to extract from a side pocket of a surtout a large Moroccan pocket-book. This he poised suspiciously in his hand, then eyed it with an air of extreme surprise, and was evidently astonished at its weight. At length he opened it, and drawing therefrom a huge letter sealed with red sealing-wax and tied carefully with red tape, let it fall precisely at the feet of the burgomaster, Superbus von Underduk. His Excellency stooped to take it up, but the aeronaut, still discomposed, and having apparently no further business to detain him in Rotterdam, began at this moment to make busy preparations for departure, and it was necessary to discharge a portion of ballast to enable him to reascend. The half-dozen bags which he threw out, one after the other, without taking the trouble to empty their contents, tumbled, every one of them, most unfortunately upon the back of the burgomaster, and rolled him over and over no less than half a dozen times, in the face of every individual in Rotterdam. It is not to be supposed, however, that the great Underduk suffered this impertinence on the part of the little old man to pass off with impunity. It is said, on the contrary, that during each of his half-dozen circumvolutions he emitted no less than half a dozen distinct and furious whiffs of his pipe, to which he held fast the whole time with all his might, and which he intends holding fast, God willing, until the day of his decease. In the meantime, the balloon arose like a lark, and soaring far away above the city, at length drifted quietly behind a cloud similar to that from which it had so oddly emerged, and was thus lost for ever to the wondering eyes of the good citizens of Rotterdam. All attention was now directed to the letter, the descent of which, and the consequences attending thereupon, had proved so fatally subversive of both person and personal dignity to His Excellency von Underduk. That functionary, however, had not failed during its circumgyratory movements to bestow a thought upon the important object of securing the epistle, which was seen, upon inspection, to fall into the most proper hands, being actually addressed to himself and Professor Rubadub, in their official capacities of President and Vice President of the Rotterdam College of Astronomy. It was accordingly opened by those dignitaries upon the spot, and found to contain the following extraordinary, and indeed very serious, communication. Oh, I do love beer. To their Excellencies von Underduk and Rubadub, President and Vice President of the States College of Astronomers in the city of Rotterdam. Your Excellencies may perhaps be able to remember an humble artisan by the names Hans Pfahl, and by the occupation a mender of bellows, who with 3 others disappeared from Rotterdam about 5 years ago in a manner which must have been considered unaccountable. If, however, it pleases your Excellencies, I, the writer of this communication, am the identical Hans Pfahl himself. It is well known to most of my fellow citizens that for a period of 40 years I continued to occupy the little square brick building at the head of the alley called Sauerkraut, in which I resided at the time of my disappearance. My ancestors have also resided therein time out of mind, and they, as well as myself, steadily following the respectable and indeed lucrative profession of mending bellows, for to speak the truth until of late years, that the heads of all the people have been set agog with politics, no better business than my own could an honest citizen of Rotterdam either deserve or desire. Credit was good, employment was never wanting, and there was no lack of either money or goodwill. But, as I was saying, we soon began to feel the effects of liberty and long speeches and radicalism and of all sorts of things. People who were formerly the best customers in the world had now not a moment of time to think of us at all. They had as much as they could do to read about the revolutions and keep up with the march of intellect and the spirit of the age. If a fire wanted fanning, it could be readily fanned with a newspaper, and as the government grew weaker, I had no doubt that leather and iron acquired durability in proportion, for in a very short time there was not a pair of bellows in all Rotterdam that ever stood in need of a stitch or required the assistance of a hammer. This was a state of things not to be endured. I soon grew as poor as a rat, and having a wife and children to provide for, my burdens at length became intolerable, and I spent hour after hour in reflecting upon the most convenient method of putting an end to my life. Duns, in the meantime, left me little leisure for contemplation. My house was literally besieged from morning till night. There were three fellows in particular who worried me beyond endurance, keeping watch continually about my door and threatening me with the law. Upon these three I vowed the bitterest revenge, if ever I should be so happy as to get them within my clutches, and I believe nothing in the world but the pleasure of this anticipation prevented me from putting my plan of suicide into immediate execution, by blowing my brains out with a blunderbuss. I thought it best, however, to dissemble my wrath, and to treat them with promises and fair words until, by some good turn of fate, an opportunity of vengeance should be afforded me. One day, having given them the slip, in feeling more than usually dejected, I continued for a long time to wander about the most obscure streets without object, until at length I chanced to stumble against the corner of a bookseller's stall. Seeing a chair close at hand for the use of customers, I threw myself doggedly into it, and hardly knowing why, opened the pages of the first volume which came within my reach. It proved to be a small pamphlet treatise on speculative astronomy, written either by Professor Encke of Berlin or by a Frenchman of somewhat similar name. I had some little tincture of information on matters of this nature, and soon became more and more absorbed in the contents of the book, reading it actually through twice before I woke to a recollection of what was passing around me. By this time it began to grow dark, and I directed my steps toward home. But the treatise, in conjunction with a discovery in pneumatics lately communicated to me as an important secret by a cousin from Nantes, had made an indelible impression on my mind, and as I sauntered along the dusky streets, I revolved carefully over in my memory the wild and sometimes unintelligible reasonings of the writer. There are some particular passages which affected my imagination in an extraordinary manner. The longer I meditated upon these, the more intense grew the interest in which had been excited within me. The limited nature of my education in general, and more especially my ignorance on subjects connected with natural philosophy, so far from rendering me diffident of my own ability to comprehend what I had read, or inducing me to mistrust the many vague notions which had arisen in consequence, merely served as a further stimulus to imagination. And I was vain enough, or perhaps reasonable enough, to doubt whether these crude ideas, which arising in an ill-regulated mind, have all the appearance, may not often in effect possess all the force, the reality, and other inherent properties of instinct or intuition. It was late when I reached home, and I went immediately to bed. My mind, however, was much too occupied to sleep, and I lay the whole night buried in meditation. Arising early in the morning, I repaired eagerly to the bookseller's stall, and laid out what little ready money I possessed, in the purchase of some of the volumes of mechanics and practical astronomy. Having arrived at home safely with these, I devoted every spare moment to their perusal, and soon made such proficiency in studies of this nature as I thought sufficient for the execution of a certain design with which either the devil or my better genius had inspired me. In the intervals of this period, I made every endeavour to conciliate the 3 creditors who had given me so much annoyance. In this I finally succeeded, partly by selling enough of my household furniture to satisfy a moiety of their claim, and partly by a promise of paying the balance upon completion of a little project which I told them I had in view, and for assistance, in which I solicited their services. By these means, for they were ignorant men, I found little difficulty in gaining them over to my purpose. Matters being thus arranged, I contrived, by the aid of my wife, and with the greatest secrecy and caution, to dispose of what property I had remaining, and to borrow, in small sums, under various pretences, and without giving any attention, I am ashamed to say, to my future means of repayment, no considerable quantity of ready money. With the means thus accruing, I proceeded to procure at intervals cambric muslin, very fine, in pieces of 12 yards each, twine, a lot of the varnish of cautuchut, a large and deep basket of wickerwork made to order, and several other articles necessary in the construction and equipment of a balloon of extraordinary dimensions. Thus I directed my wife to make up as soon as possible, and gave her all requisite information as to the particular method of proceeding. In the meantime, I worked up the twine into a network of sufficient dimensions, rigged it with a hoop and the necessary cords, and made purchase of numerous instruments and materials for experiment in the upper regions of the upper atmosphere. I then took opportunities of conveying by night to a retired situation east of Rotterdam 5 iron-bound casks to contain about 50 gallons each, and one of a larger size, 6 tin tubes 3 inches in diameter, properly shaped and 10 feet in length, a quantity of particular metallic substance or semi-metal, which I shall not name, and a dozen demijohns of a very common acid. The gas to be formed from these latter materials is a gas never yet generated by any other person than myself, or at least never applied to any similar purpose. I can only venture to say here that it is a constituent of azote, so long considered irreducible, and that its density is about 37.4 times less than that of hydrogen. It is tasteless, but not odorless, burns when pure with a greenish flame, and is instantaneously fatal to animal life. Its full secret I would make no difficulty in disclosing, but that it of right belongs, as I have hinted, to a citizen of Nantes, in France, by whom it was conditionally communicated to myself. The same individual submitted to me, without being at all aware of my intentions, a method of constructing balloons from the membrane of a certain animal, through which any substance of any escape of gas was nearly an impossibility. I found it, however, altogether too expensive, and was not sure, upon the whole, whether cambric muslin with a coating of gum cautuchuk was not equally as good. I mention this circumstance because I think it probable that hereafter the individual in question may attempt a balloon ascension with the novel gas and material I have spoken of, and I do not wish to deprive him of the honour of a very singular invention. On the spot which I intended each of the smaller casks to occupy respectively during the inflation of the balloon, I privately dug a small hole, the holes forming in this manner a circle 25 feet in diameter, in the centre of the circle being the station designed for the large cask. I also dug a hole of greater depth. In each of the 5 smaller holes I deposited a canister containing 50 pounds, and in the larger one a keg holding 150 pounds of cannon powder. These, the keg and canisters, I connected in a proper manner with covered trains, and having let into one of these canisters the end of about 4 feet of slow match, I covered up the hole and placed the cask over it, leaving the other end of the match protruding about an inch and barely visible beyond the cask. I then filled up the remaining holes and placed the barrels over them in their destined situation. Besides the articles above enumerated, I conveyed to the depot, and there secreted one of M. Grimm's improvements upon the apparatus for condensation of the atmospheric air. I found this machine, however, to require considerable alteration before it could be adapted to the purposes to which I intended making it applicable. But with severe labour and unremitting perseverance, I at length met with entire success in all my preparations. My balloon was soon completed. It would contain more than 40,000 cubic feet of gas. It would take me up easily, I calculated, with all my implements, and if I managed rightly, with 175 pounds of ballast into the bargain. It had received 3 coats of varnish, and I found the cambric muslin to answer all the purposes of silk itself, being quite as strong and a good deal less expensive. Everything being now ready, I exacted from my wife an oath of secrecy in relation to all my actions from the day of my first visit to the bookseller's store, and promising on my part to return as soon as circumstances would permit, I gave her what little money I had left, and bade her farewell. Indeed, I had no fear on her account. She was what people call a notable woman, and could manage matters in the world without my assistance. I believe, to tell the truth, she always looked upon me as an idle body, a mere make-weight, good for nothing but building castles in the air, and was rather glad to get rid of me. It was a dark night when I bade her goodbye, and taking with me as aide-de-camp the 3 creditors who had given me so much trouble, we carried the balloon with the car and accoutrements by a roundabout way to the station where the other articles were deposited. We there found them all unmolested, and I proceeded immediately to the business. It was the 1st of April. The night, as I said before, was dark. There was not a star to be seen, and a drizzling rain, falling at intervals, rendered us very uncomfortable. But my chief anxiety was concerning the balloon, which, in spite of the varnish with which it was defended, began to grow rather heavy with the moisture. The powder was also liable to damage. I therefore kept my 3 duns working with great diligence, pounding down ice around the central cask, and stirring the acid in the others. They did not cease, however, importuning me with questions as to what I intended to do with all this apparatus, and expressed much dissatisfaction at the terrible labour I made them undergo. They could not perceive, so they said, what good was likely to result from their getting wet to the skin merely to take part in such horrible incantations. I began to get uneasy, and worked away with all my might, for I verily believe the idiots supposed that I had entered into a compact with the devil, and that, in short, what I was now doing was nothing better than it should be. I was, therefore, in great fear of their leaving me altogether. I contrived, however, to pacify them by promises of payment, all scores in full, as soon as I could bring the present business to a termination. To these speeches they gave, of course, their own interpretation, fancying, no doubt, that at all events I should come into possession of vast quantities of ready money, and provided I pay them all I owed, and a trifle more in consideration of their services, I dare say they cared very little what became of either my soul, or my carcass. In about 4 hours and a half I found the balloon sufficiently inflated. I attached the car, therefore, and put all my implements in it: a telescope, a barometer with some important modifications, a thermometer, an electrometer, a compass, magnetic needle, a seconds watch, a bell, a speaking trumpet, etc., etc., etc. Also a globe of glass, exhausted of air and carefully closed with a stopper, not forgetting the condensing apparatus, some unslacked lime, a stick of sealing wax, a copious supply of water, and a large quantity of provisions, such as pemmican, in which much nutriment is contained in comparatively little bulk. I also secured in the car a pair of pigeons and a cat. It was now nearly daybreak, and I thought it was high time to take my departure. Dropping a lighted cigar on the ground, as if by accident, I took the opportunity in stooping to pick it up, of igniting privately the piece of slow match, the end of which, as I said before, protruded a little beyond the lower rim of one of the smaller casks. This manoeuvre was totally unperceived on the part of the three duns, and jumping into the car, I immediately cut the single cord which held me to the earth, and was pleased to find that I shot upward with inconceivable rapidity, carrying with all ease 175 pounds of leaden ballast, and able to have carried up as many more. As I left the earth, the barometer stood at 30 inches, and the centigrade thermometer at 19 degrees. Scarcely, however, had I attained the height of 50 yards, when roaring and rumbling up after me in the most tumultuous and terrible manner, came so dense a hurricane of fire and gravel and burning wood and blazing metal and mangled limbs, that my very heart sunk within me, and I fell down in the bottom of the car, trembling with terror. Indeed, I now perceived that I had entirely overdone the business, and that the main consequences of the shock were yet to be experienced. Accordingly, in less than a second, I felt all the blood in my body rushing to my temples, and immediately thereupon a concussion, which I shall never forget, burst abruptly through the night, and seemed to rip the very firmament asunder. When I afterward had time for reflection, I did not fail to attribute the extreme violence of the explosion, as regarded myself, to its proper cause, the situation directly above it and in line of its greatest power. But at the time, I thought of only preserving my life. The balloon at first collapsed, then furiously expanded, then whirled round and round with sickening velocity, and finally, reeling and staggering like a drunken man, whirled me over the rim of the car and left me dangling at a terrific height, with my head downward and my face outward, by a piece of slender cord about 3 feet in length, which hung accidentally through a crevice near the bottom of the wickerwork, and which, as I fell, my left foot became almost providentially entangled. It is impossible, utterly impossible, to form any adequate idea of the horror of my situation. I gasped convulsively for air. A shudder resembling a fit of the ague agitated every nerve and muscle in my frame. I felt my eyes starting from their sockets. A horrible nausea overwhelmed me, and at length I lost all consciousness in a swoon. How long I remained in this state, it is impossible to say. It must, however, have been an inconsiderable time, or no inconsiderable time, for when I partially recovered the sense of existence, I found the day breaking, the balloon at a prodigious height over a wilderness of ocean, and not a trace of land to be discovered far and wide within the limits of the vast horizon. My sensations, however, upon thus recovering, were by no means so replete with agony as might have been anticipated. Indeed, there was much of madness in the calm survey which I began to take of my situation. I drew up to my eyes each of my hands, one after the other, and wondered what occurrence could have given rise to the swelling of the veins and the horrible blackness of the fingernails. I afterwards examined my head, shaking it repeatedly and feeling it with minute attention, until I succeeded in satisfying myself that it was not, as I had more than half suspected, larger than my balloon. Then, in a knowing manner, I felt in both my breeches pockets, and missing therefrom a set of tablets and a toothpick case, endeavoured to account for their disappearance, and not being able to do so, felt inexpressibly chagrined. It now occurred to me that I suffered a great uneasiness in the joint of my left ankle, and a dim consciousness of my situation began to glimmer through my mind. But strange to say, I was neither astonished nor horror-stricken. If I felt any emotion at all, it was a kind of chuckling satisfaction at the cleverness I was about to display in extricating myself from this dilemma. And never, for a moment, did I look upon my ultimate safety as a question susceptible of doubt. For a few minutes I remained wrapped in the profoundest meditations. I have a distinct recollection of frequently compressing my lips, putting my forefinger to the side of my nose, and making use of other gesticulations and grimaces common to men who at ease in their armchairs meditate upon matters of intricacy or importance. Having, as I thought, sufficiently collected my ideas, I now, with great caution and deliberation, put my hands behind my back and unfastened the large iron buckle which belonged to the waistband of my pantaloons. This buckle had 3 teeth, which, being somewhat rusty, turned with great difficulty on their axis. I brought them, however, after some trouble, at right angles to the body of the buckle, and was glad to find them remain firm in that position. Holding within my teeth the instrument thus obtained, I now proceeded to untie the knot of my cravat. I had to rest several times before I could accomplish this manoeuvre, but it was at length accomplished. To the one end of the cravat I made fast the buckle, and the other end I tied, for greater security, tightly around my waist. Drawing now my body upward with a prodigious exertion of muscular force, I succeeded, at the very first trial, in throwing the buckle over the car, and entangling it, as I had anticipated, in the circular rim of the wickerwork. My body was now inclined toward the side of the car, at an angle of about 45 degrees, but it must not be understood that I was therefore only 45 degrees below the perpendicular. So far from it, I still lay nearly level with the plane of the horizon, for the change of situation which I had acquired had forced the bottom of the car considerably outward from my position, which was now accordingly one of the most imminent peril. It should be remembered, however, that when I fell in the first instance from the car, I had fallen with my face turned toward the balloon, instead of turned outwardly from it, as it actually was, or if, in the second place, the cord by which I was suspended had chanced to hang over the upper edge, instead of through a crevice near the bottom of the car. I say it may be readily conceived that in either of those supposed cases I should not have been able to accomplish even as much as I had now accomplished, and the disclosures now made would have been utterly lost to posterity. I had therefore every reason to be grateful, although in the point of fact I was still too stupid to be anything at all, and hung for perhaps a quarter of an hour in that extraordinary manner without making the slightest further exertion, and in a singularly tranquil state of idiotic enjoyment. But this feeling did not fail to die rapidly away, and thereunto succeeded horror and dismay, and the sense of utter helplessness and ruin. In fact, the blood so long accumulating in the vessels of my head and throat, which had hitherto buoyed up my spirits with delirium, had now begun to retire within their proper channels, and the distinctiveness which thus added to my perception of the danger merely served to deprive me of the self-possession and courage to encounter it. But this weakness was, luckily for me, of no very long duration. In good time came to my rescue the spirit of despair, and with frantic cries and struggles, I jerked my way bodily upward till at length, clutching with a vice-like grip the long-desired rim, I writhed my person over it, fell headlong and shuddering within the car. It was not until some time afterward that I recovered myself sufficiently to attend to the ordinary cares of the balloon. I then, however, examined it with attention, and found it, to my great relief, uninjured. My implements were all safe, and fortunately I had lost neither ballast nor provisions. Indeed, I had so well secured them in their places that such an accident was entirely out of the question. Looking at my watch, I found it 6 o'clock. I was still rapidly ascending, and the barometer gave me a present altitude of 3¾ miles. Immediately beneath me lay the ocean, and in that lay a small black object, slightly oblong in shape, seemingly about the size of a domino, and in every aspect bearing a great resemblance to one of those toys. Bringing my telescope to bear upon it, I plainly discerned it to be a British 94-gun ship, close hauled and pitching heavily in the sea with her head to the west-southwest. Besides this ship, I saw nothing but the ocean and the sky and the sun, which had long arisen. It is now high time that I shall explain to your Excellencies the object of my voyage. Your Excellencies will bear in mind that distressed circumstances in Rotterdam had at length driven me to the resolution of committing suicide. It was not, however, that to life itself I had any positive disgust, but that I was harassed beyond endurance by the adventurous miseries attending my situation. In this state of mind, wishing to live, yet wearied with life, the treatise at the stall of the bookseller, backed by the opportune discovery of my cousin of Nantes, opened a resource to my imagination. I then finally made up my mind. I determined to depart, yet live, to leave the world, yet continue to exist, in short, to drop enigmas. I resolved, let what would ensue, to force a passage, if I could, to the moon. Now, lest I should be supposed more of a madman than I actually am, I will detail, as well as I am able, the considerations which led me to believe that an achievement of this nature, although without doubt difficult and full of danger, was not absolutely, to a bold spirit, beyond the confines of the possible. The moon's actual distance from the earth was the first thing to attend to. Now, the mean or average interval between the centers of the two planets is 59.9643 of the Earth's equatorial radii, or only about 237,000 miles. I say the mean or average interval, but it must be borne in mind that the form of the moon's orbits being an ellipse of eccentricity amounting to no less than 0.05484 of the major semi-axis of the ellipse itself, and the Earth's center being situated in its focus, if I could, in any manner, contrive to meet the moon in its perigee, the above-mentioned distance would be materially diminished. But, to say nothing at present of this possibility, I was very certain that, at all events, from the 237,000 miles, I would have to deduct the radius of the Earth, say 4,000, and the radius of the Moon, say 1,080, in all 5,080, leaving an actual interval to be traversed, under average circumstances, of 231,920 miles. Now, this, I reflected, was no extraordinary distance. Travelling on land has been repeatedly accomplished at the rate of 60 miles per hour, and indeed much greater speed may be anticipated. But even at this velocity, it would take me no more than 160 days to reach the surface of the moon. There were, however, many particulars inducing me to believe that my average rate of travelling might possibly very much exceed that of 60 miles per hour, and as these considerations did not fail to make a deep impression upon my mind, I will mention them more fully hereafter. The next point to be regarded was one of greater importance. From indications afforded by the barometer, we find that in ascensions from the surface of the earth we have, at the height of 1,000 feet, left below us about 1/30th of the entire mass of atmospheric air, that at 10,600 we have ascended through nearly 1/3, and that at 18,000, which is not far from the elevation of Cotopaxi, we have surmounted 1/2 of the material, or at all events 1/2 the ponderable body of air incumbent upon our globe. It is also calculated that an altitude not exceeding the 100th part of the Earth's diameter, that is, not exceeding 80 miles, the rarefaction would be so excessive that animal life could in no manner be sustained, and moreover, that the most delicate means we possess of ascertaining the presence of the atmosphere would be inadequate to assure us of its existence. But I did not fail to perceive that these latter calculations were founded altogether on our experimental knowledge of the properties of air and the mechanical laws regulating its dilation and compression in what may be called, comparatively speaking, the immediate vicinity of the Earth itself. And at the same time, it is taken for granted that animal life is and must be essentially incapable of modification at any given unattainable distance from the surface. Now, all such reasoning and from such data must, of course, be simply analogical. The greatest height ever reached by man was that of 225,000 feet, attained in the aeronautic expedition of Messieurs Gay-Lussac and Biot. This is a moderate altitude, even when compared with the 80 miles in question. I could not help thinking that the subject admitted room for doubt and great latitude for speculation. But in point of fact, an ascension being made to any given altitude, the ponderable quantity of air surmounted in any further ascension is by no means in proportion to the additional height ascended, as may plainly be seen from what has been stated before, but in a ratio constantly decreasing. It is therefore evident that, ascend as high as we may, we cannot, literally speaking, arrive at a limit beyond which no atmosphere is to be found. It must exist, I argued, although it may exist in a state of infinite rarefaction. On the other hand, I was aware that arguments have not been wanting to prove the existence of a real and definite limit to the atmosphere, beyond which there is absolutely no air whatsoever. But a circumstance that has been left out of view by those who contend for such a limit seemed to be, although no positive refutation of their creed, still a point worthy of very serious investigation. On comparing the intervals between the successive arrivals of Encke's comet at its perihelion, arrivals of Encke's comet at its perihelion after giving tractions of the planets, On comparing the intervals between the successive arrivals of Encke's comet at its perihelion, after giving credit, in the most exact manner, for all the disturbances due to the attractions of the planets, it appears that the periods are gradually diminishing. That is to say, the major axis of the comet's ellipse is growing shorter in a slow but perfectly regular decrease. Now, this is precisely what ought to be the case if we suppose a resistance experienced from the comet from an extremely rare ethereal medium pervading the regions of its orbit. For it is evident that such a medium must, in regarding the comet's velocity, increase its centripetal by weakening its centrifugal force. In other words, the sun's attraction would be constantly attaining greater power, and the comet would be drawn nearer at every revolution. Indeed, there is no other way of accounting for the variation in question, but again, the real diameter of the same comet's nebulosity is observed to contract rapidly as it approaches the sun, and dilate with equal rapidity in its departure towards their aphelion. Was I not justified in supposing, with M. Volz, that this apparent condensation of its volume has its origin in the compression of the same ethereal medium I have spoken of before, and which is dense in proportion to its vicinity to the sun? The lenticular-shaped phenomenon, also called the zodiacal light, was a matter of worthy attention. This radiance, so apparent in the tropics, which cannot be mistaken for any meteoric luster, extends from the horizon obliquely upwards, and follows generally the direction of the sun's equator. It appeared to me evidently in the nature of a rare atmosphere extending from the sun outward, beyond the orbit of Venus at least, and I believed indefinitely further. Indeed, this medium I could not suppose confined to the path of the comet's ellipse, or to the immediate neighbourhood of the sun. It was easy, on the contrary, to imagine it pervading the entire regions of our planetary system, condensed into what we call atmosphere at the planets themselves, and perhaps at some of them modified by considerations purely geological, that is to say, modified or varied in its proportions or absolute nature, by matters volatilized from the respective orbs. Are we hanging on in there? I need to top up my whiskey real quick here. How long we got? Oh, it goes on a bit. Blimey. We're not yet halfway through. 3 a.m. and still hanging. The problem is, the more whiskey I drink, the more slurry I get. Logan is making the chat wild. Well, I expect nothing else. But he's left, hasn't he? Well, I should hope it's better than the IO book videos on YouTube. Oh. No, he's here. All right, Logan. Oh. He's banned. What's he banned? He's judging my alcohol choices. Yeah, that's because he's got no taste. Simple, isn't it? Horse friends. No one got banned and no one got timed out. This never happened. All right, well, early doors. Maybe I'll get banned. 3 more whiskeys in. All right, here we go. Having adopted this view of the subject, I had little further hesitation, granting that on my passage I should meet with atmosphere essentially the same as that of the surface of the earth. I conceived that, by means of the very ingenious apparatus of Monsieur Grimm, I should readily be enabled to condense it in sufficient quantity for the purposes of respiration. This would remove the chief obstacle in a journey to the moon. I had indeed spent some money and great labour in adapting the apparatus to the object intended, and confidently looked forward to its successful application, if I could manage to complete the voyage within any reasonable period. This brings me back to the rate at which it would be possible to travel. It is true that balloons, in the first state of their ascensions from the earth, are known to rise with a velocity comparatively moderate. Now the power of elevation lies altogether in the superior gravity of the atmospheric air compared with the gas in the balloon, and at first sight it does not appear probable that as the balloon acquires altitude and consequently arrives successfully in an atmospheric strata of densities probably diminished, I say it does not appear at all reasonable that, in this its upward progress, the original velocity should be accelerated. On the other hand, I was not aware that, in any recorded ascension, a diminution had been proved to be apparent in the absolute rate of ascent, although such should have been the case, if on account of nothing else, on account of the escape of gas through balloons ill constructed, and varnished with no better material than the ordinary varnish. It seemed, therefore, that the effect of such escape was only sufficient to counterbalance the effect of the acceleration attained in the diminishing of the balloon's distance from the gravitating centre. I now considered that, provided in my passage I found the medium I had imagined, and provided that it should prove to be essentially what we denominate atmospheric air, it could make comparatively little difference at what extreme state of rarefaction I should discover it. That is to say, in regard to my power of ascending, for the gas in the balloon would not only be itself subject to the similar rarefaction, in proportion to the occurrence of which I would suffer an escape of so much would be requisite to prevent explosion, but being what it was, would at all events continue specifically lighter than any compound whatever of mere nitrogen and oxygen. Thus, there was a chance, in fact there was a strong probability, that at no epoch of my ascent I should reach a point where the united weights of my immense balloon, the inconceivably rare gas within it, the car, its contents, should equal the weight of the mass of the surrounding atmosphere displaced. And this will be readily understood as the sole condition upon which my upward flight would be arrested. But if this point were even attained, I could dispense with ballast and other weight to the amount of nearly 300 pounds. In the meantime, the force of gravitation would be constantly diminishing in proportion to the squares of the distance, and so, with a velocity prodigiously accelerating, I should at length arrive in those distant regions where the force of the earth's attractions will be superseded by that of the moon. There was another difficulty, however, which occasioned me some little disquietude. It had been observed that, in balloon ascensions to any considerable height, besides the pain attending respiration, great uneasiness experienced about the head and body, often accompanied with bleeding of the nose and other symptoms of an alarming kind, and growing more and more inconvenient in proportion to the altitude attained. This was a reflection of a nature somewhat startling. Was it not probable that these symptoms would increase until terminated by death itself? I finally thought not. Their origin was to be looked for in the progressive removal of the customary atmospheric pressure upon the surface of the body, and consequent distension of the superficial blood vessels, not in any positive disorganization of the animal system, as in the case of difficulty in breathing, where the atmospheric density is chemically insufficient for due renovation of blood in a ventricle of the heart. Unless for default of this renovation, I could see no reason, therefore, why life could not be sustained even in a vacuum. For the expansion and compression of the chest, commonly called breathing, is action purely muscular, and the cause, not the effect, of respiration. In a word, I conceived that, as the body should become habituated to the want of atmospheric pressure, the sensations of pain would gradually diminish, and to endure them while they continued, I relied with confidence upon the iron hardihood of my constitution. Thus, may it please your excellencies, I have detailed some, though by no means all, the considerations which led me to form the project of a lunar voyage. I shall now proceed to lay before you the result of an attempt so apparently audacious in conception, and at all events so utterly unparalleled in the annals of mankind. Having attained the altitude before mentioned, that is to say 3 miles and 3/4, I threw out from the car a quantity of feathers, and found that still I ascended with sufficient rapidity. There was therefore no necessity for discharging my ballast. I was glad of this, for I wished to retain with me as much weight as I could carry, for the obvious reason that I could not be positive either about the gravitation or the atmospheric density of the moon. I as yet suffered no bodily inconvenience, breathing with great freedom, and feeling no pain whatever in the head. The cat was lying demurely upon my coat, which I had taken off, and eyeing the pigeons with an air of nonchalance. These latter, being tied by the leg to prevent their escape, were busily employed in picking up some grains of rice scattered for them in the bottom of the car. At 20 minutes past 6 o'clock, the barometer showed an elevation of 26,400 feet, or 5 miles to a fraction. The prospect seemed unbounded. Indeed, it is very easily calculated by means of spherical geometry how great an extent of the earth's area I beheld. The convex surface of any segment of a sphere is, to the entire surface of the sphere itself, as the verse sine of the segment to the diameter of the sphere. Now, in my case, the verse sine, that is to say, the thickness of the segment beneath me, was equal to my elevation, or the elevation of the point of sight above the surface, as 5 miles then to 8,000 would express the proportion of the earth's area seen by me. In other words, I beheld as much as a 1600th part of the whole surface of the globe. The sea appeared unruffled as a mirror, although by means of telescope I could perceive it to be in a state of violent agitation. The ship was no longer visible, having drifted away, apparently to the eastward. I now began to experience, at intervals, severe pain in the head, especially about the ears, still, however, breathing with tolerable freedom. The cat and pigeons seemed to suffer no inconvenience whatsoever. At 20 minutes before 7, the balloon entered a long series of dense cloud, which put me to great trouble by damaging my condensing apparatus and wetting me to the skin. This was, to be sure, a singular rencontre, for I had not believed it possible that a cloud of this nature could be sustained at so great an elevation. I thought it best, however, to throw out 2 5-pound pieces of ballast, reserving still a weight of 165 pounds. Upon doing so, I soon rose above the difficulty, and perceived immediately that I had obtained a great increase in my rate of ascent. In a few seconds after my leaving the cloud, a flash of vivid lightning shot from one end of it to the other, and caused it to kindle up throughout its vast extent like a mass of ignited charcoal. This, it must be remembered, was in the broad light of day. No fancy may picture the sublimity which might have been exhibited by a similar phenomenon taking place amid the darkness of the night. Hell itself might have been found a fitting image. Even as it was, my hair stood on end, while I gazed afar down within the yawning abysses, letting imagination descend and stalk about in the strange vaulted halls and ruddy gulfs and red ghostly chasms of the hideous and unfathomable fire. I indeed had made a narrow escape. Had the balloon remained a very short while longer within the cloud, that is to say, had not the inconvenience of getting wet determined me to discharge the ballast, my destruction might, and probably would, have been the consequence. Such perils, although little considered, are perhaps the greatest which must be encountered in balloons. I had by this time, however, attained too great an elevation to be any longer uneasy on this head. I was now rising rapidly, and by 7 o'clock the barometer indicated an altitude of no less than 9 miles and a half. I began to find great difficulty in drawing my breath. My head, too, was excessively painful, and having felt for some time moisture upon my cheeks, I at length discovered it to be blood, which was oozing quite fast from the drums of my ears. My eyes also gave me great uneasiness. On passing my hand over them, they seemed to have protruded from their sockets in an inconsiderable degree, and all the objects in the car, even the balloon itself, appeared distorted to my vision. These symptoms were more than I had expected, and occasioned me some alarm. At this juncture, very imprudently and without consideration, I threw out from the car 3 5-pound pieces of ballast. The accelerated rate of ascent thus obtained carried me too rapidly, and without sufficient gradation, into a highly rarefied stratum of the atmosphere, and the result had nearly proved fatal to my expedition and to myself. I was suddenly seized with a spasm which lasted for more than 5 minutes. Even when this, in a measure, ceased, I could catch my breath only at long intervals, and in a gasping manner, bleeding all the while copiously at the nose and ears, and even slightly at the eyes. The pigeons appeared distressed in the extreme, and struggled to escape, while the cat mewed piteously, and with her tongue hanging out of her mouth, staggered to and fro in the car as if under the influence of poison. I now too late discovered the great rashness of which I had been guilty in discharging the ballast, and my agitation was excessive. I anticipated nothing less than death, and death in a few minutes. The physical suffering I underwent contributed also to render me nearly incapable of making any exertion for the preservation of my life. I had indeed little power of reflection left, and the violence of the pain in my head seemed to be greatly on the increase. Thus I found that my senses would shortly give way altogether, and I had already clutched one of the valve ropes with a view of attempting a descent, when the recollection of the trick I had played the three creditors and the possible consequences to myself should I return operated to deter me for a moment. I lay down in the bottom of the car and endeavoured to collect my faculties. In this I so far succeeded as to determine upon the experiment of losing blood. Having no lancet, however, I was constrained to perform the operation in the best manner I was able, and finally succeeded in opening a vein in my left arm with the blade of my penknife. The blood had hardly commenced flowing when I experienced a sensible relief, and by the time I had lost about half a moderate basinful, most of the worst symptoms had abandoned me entirely. I nevertheless did not think it expedient to attempt getting on my feet immediately, but, having tied up my arm as well as I could, I lay still for about a quarter of an hour. At the end of this time I arose, and found myself freer and from absolute pain of any kind than I had been during the last hour and quarter of my ascension. The difficulty of breathing, however, was diminished in a very slight degree, and I found that it would soon be positively necessary to make use of my condenser. In the meantime I looked toward the cat, who was again snugly stowed away upon my coat. I discovered, to my infinite surprise, that she had taken the opportunity of my indisposition to bring into light a litter of 3 little kittens. This was an addition to the number of passengers on my part altogether unexpected, but I was pleased at the occurrence. It would afford me a chance of bringing to a kind of test the truth of a surmise which, more than anything else, had influenced me in attempting this ascension. I had imagined that the habitual endurance of the atmospheric pressure at the surface of the earth was the cause, or nearly so, of the pain attending animal existence at a distance above the surface. Should the kittens be found to suffer uneasiness in an equal degree with their mother, I must consider my theory in fault, but a failure to do so I should look upon as a strong confirmation of my idea. By 8 o'clock I had actually attained an elevation of 17 miles above the surface of the earth. 17 miles. Thus it seemed to me evident that my rate of ascent was not only on the increase, but that the progression would have been apparent in a slight degree, even had I not discharged the ballast which I had. The pains in my head and ears returned, at intervals, with violence, and I still continued to bleed occasionally at the nose. But upon the whole, I suffered much less than might have been expected. I breathed, however, at every moment, with more and more difficulty. Each inhalation was attended with the troublesome spasmodic action of the chest. I now unpacked the condensing apparatus and got it ready for immediate use. The view of the earth at this period of my ascension was beautiful indeed. To the westward, to the northward, the southward, as far as I could see, lay a boundless sheet of apparently unruffled ocean, which every moment gained a deeper and deeper tint of blue. At a vast distance to the eastward, although perfectly discernible, extended the islands of Great Britain, the entire Atlantic coasts of France and Spain, with a small portion of the northern part of the continent of Africa. Of individual edifices not a trace could be discovered, and the proudest cities of mankind had utterly faded away from the face of the earth. What mainly astonished me in the appearance of things below was the seeming concavity of the surface of the globe. I had thoughtlessly enough expected to see its real convexity become evident as I ascended, but a very little reflection sufficed to explain the discrepancy. A line dropped from my position perpendicularly to the earth would have formed the perpendicular of a right-angled triangle, of which the base would have extended from the right angle to the horizon, and the hypotenuse from the horizon to my position. but my height was little or nothing in comparison with my prospect. In other words, the base and the hypotenuse of the supposed triangle would, in my case, have been so long, when compared to my perpendicular, that the two former might have been regarded as nearly parallel. In this manner, the horizon of the aeronaut appears to be upon a level with the car, but as the point immediately beneath him seems, and is, at a great distance below him, it seems, of course, also at a great distance below the horizon. Hence the impression of concavity, and this impression must remain until the elevation shall bear so great a proportion to the prospect that the apparent parallelism of the base and hypotenuse disappears. The pigeons about this time seeming to undergo much suffering, I determined upon giving them their liberty. I first untied one of them, a beautiful grey mottled pigeon, and placed it upon the rim of the wickerwork. He appeared extremely uneasy, looking anxiously around him, fluttering his wings and making a loud cooing noise, but could not be persuaded to trust himself from the car. I took him up at last, and threw him to about half a dozen yards from the balloon. He made, however, no attempt to descend as I had expected, but struggled with great vehemence to get back, uttering at the same time very shrill and piercing cries. He at length succeeded in regaining his former station on the rim, but had hardly done so when his head dropped upon his breast, and he fell dead within the car. The other one did not prove so unfortunate. To prevent his following the example of his companion and accomplishing a return, I threw him down with all my force, and was pleased to find him continue his descent with great velocity, making use of his wings with ease and in a particularly natural manner. In very short time he was out of sight, and I have no doubt he reached home in safety. Puss, who seemed in a great measure recovered from her illness, now made a hearty meal of the dead bird, and went to sleep with such apparent satisfaction. Her kittens were quite lively, and so far evinced not the slightest sign of any uneasiness. At 8:15, being able to no longer draw breath without the most intolerable pain, I proceeded forthwith to adjust the apparatus around the car belonging to the condenser. This apparatus will require some little explanation, and your excellencies will please to bear in mind that my object in the first place was to surround myself and the car entirely with a barricade against the highly rarefied atmosphere in which I was existing, with the intentions of introducing within this barricade, by means of my condenser, a quantity of this atmosphere sufficiently condensed for the purposes of respiration. With this object in view, I had prepared a very strong, perfectly airtight but flexible gum elastic bag. In this bag, which was of sufficient dimensions, the entire car was in a manner placed. That is to say, the bag, was drawn over the whole bottom of the car, up its sides, and so on along the outside of the ropes, to the upper rim or hoop where the network is attached. Having pulled the bag up in this way, and formed a complete enclosure on all sides, and at the bottom, it was now necessary to fasten up its top or mouth by passing its material over the hoop of the network, in other words, between the network and the hoop. But if the network was separated from the hoop to admit this passage, what was to sustain the car in the meantime? Now the network was not permanently fastened to the hoop, but attached by a series of running loops or nooses. I therefore undid only a few of these loops at a time, leaving the car suspended by the remainder. Having thus inserted a portion of the cloth forming the upper part of the bag, I refastened the loops, not to the hoop, for that would have been impossible, since the cloth now intervened, but to a series of large buttons affixed to the cloth itself, about 3 feet below the mouth of the bag. The intervals upon the buttons having been made to correspond to the intervals between the loops. This done, a few more of the loops were unfastened from the rim, a farther portion of the cloth introduced, and the disengaged loops then connected with the proper buttons. In this way, it was possible to insert the whole upper part of the bag between the network and the hoop. It is evident that the hoop would now drop down within the car, while the whole weight of the car itself, with all its contents, would be held up merely by the strength of the buttons. This, at first sight, would seem an inadequate dependence, but it was by no means so, for the buttons were not only very strong in themselves, but so close together that a very slight portion of the whole weight was supported by any one of them. Indeed, the car and contents had been 3 times heavier than they were, I should not have been at all uneasy. I now raised up the hoop again without the covering of gum elastic, and propped it at nearly its former height by means of 3 light poles prepared for the occasion. This was done, of course, to keep the bag distended at the top, and to preserve the lower part of the network in its proper situation. All that now remained was to fasten up the mouth of the enclosure, and this being readily accomplished by gathering the folds of the material together and twisting them very tightly on the inside by means of a stationary tourniquet. In the sides of the covering thus adjusted around the car had been inserted 3 circular panes of thick but very clear glass, through which I could see without difficulty around me in every horizontal direction. In that portion of the cloth forming the bottom was likewise a 4th window of the same kind, and corresponding with the small aperture in the floor of the car itself. This enabled me to see perpendicularly down, but having found it impossible to place any similar contrivance overhead, on account of the peculiar manner of closing up the opening there, and the account of the consequent wrinkles in the cloth, I could expect to see no object situated directly in my zenith. This, of course, was a matter of little consequence, for, had I been able to place a window at the top, the balloon itself would have prevented my making use of it. About a foot below one of the side windows was a circular opening, 3 inches in diameter, and fitted with a brass rim adapted in its inner edge to the windings of a screw. In this rim was screwed the large tube of the condenser, the body of the machine being, of course, within the chamber of the gum elastic. Through this tube, a quantity of the rare atmospheric circumjacent, being drawn by means of a vacuum created in the body of the machine, was thence discharged, in a state of condensation, to mingle with the thin air already in the chamber. This operation being repeated several times, at length filled the chamber with atmosphere proper for all the purposes of respiration. But in so confined a space, it would, in a short time, necessarily become foul, and unfit for use from the frequent contact with the lungs. It was then ejected by a small valve at the bottom of the car, the dense air readily sinking into the thinner atmosphere below. To avoid the inconvenience of making a total vacuum at any moment within the chamber, this purification was never accomplished all at once, but in a gradual manner, the valve being opened only for a few seconds, then closed again, until 1 or 2 strokes from the pump of the condenser had supplied the place of the atmosphere ejected. For the sake of experiment, I had put the cat and kittens in a small basket, and suspended it outside the car to a button at the bottom, close by the valve, through which I could feed them at any moment when necessary. I did this at some little risk before closing the mouth of the chamber, by reaching under the car with one of the poles before mentioned, to which a hook had been attached. As soon as the dense air was admitted in the chamber, the hoop and poles became unnecessary. The expansion of the entire atmosphere powerfully distended the gum elastic. By the time I had fully completed these arrangements and filled the chamber as explained, I wanted only 10 minutes of 9 o'clock. During the whole period of my being thus employed, I endured the most terrible distress from difficulty of respiration, and bitterly did I repent the negligence, or rather foolhardiness, of which I had been guilty of putting off to the last moment a matter of such importance. But having at length accomplished it, I soon began to reap the benefit of my invention. Once again I breathed with perfect freedom and ease, and indeed, why would I not? I was also agreeably surprised to find myself, in a great measure, relieved from the violent pains which had hitherto tormented me. A slight headache, accompanied with a sensation of fullness or distension about the wrists, the ankles, and the throat, was nearly all of which I now had to complain. Thus it seemed evident that the greater part of the uneasiness attending the removal of atmospheric pressure had actually worn off, as I had expected, and that much of the pain endured for the last 2 hours would have been attributed altogether to the effects of deficient respiration. At 20 minutes before 9 o'clock, that is to say, a short time prior to my closing up of the mouth of the chamber, the mercury attained its limit, or ran down in the barometer, which, as I mentioned before, was one of an extended construction. It then indicated an altitude on my part of 132,000 feet, or 20 miles, and I consequently surveyed at that time an extent of the earth's area amounting no less than 320th of its entire superficies. Got me this one. Superficies. My goodness, I was doing so well. Superficies. Whiskey doing its work, you're right. Guys, what's the time? We have 14 more pages to go. I think maybe we'll do a couple more, and then we might have to call it a night, I think. Is that all right? It's pretty long, isn't it? I should have checked how long it was in the index. Yeah, no, that's 39 pages. Oh, some of them are really short. Oh, well, I think what I need to say is that we've done very good here for the first one. I'm steering this boat. Well, thank you, Monster Heart. Who's raiding? House of Usher is super short. Yeah, some of them are literally like 6 pages. They put the long one at the front, and I didn't check how many pages it was. It's a black cat. So there's only 8 pages of the black cat. Yeah, this one's 40 something pages, 38 pages. This one. We're almost there though. All right. I'll tell you what. We're going to leave it on page 24 at 20 minutes before 9 o'clock. I'm going to read a poem, and then we're going to have a chat, and then we're going to go to bed. Or not. You don't have to go to bed. The first poem on the list is The Raven. Would that be a good one? I don't know if there's some kind of instant democracy thing going on. Yes, yes, yes. I don't want to go to bed. You don't have to go to bed. I'm just going to stop reading. The Raven! Raven! All right. Bookmarks going in. Page 24. We'll remember that for next time. 943. Page 943. We'll go back. Look at this. This is a weapon. All right. Give me a second here. I'm just going to glance through it. Mind you, it's not a short poem neither. Here we go. Page 24. I've got a bookmark. They gave me a bookmark in the shop. Who needs pepper spray when you have this beast in your bag? What kind of beast are you talking about? I'm not chugging. What happened? Coyote. Who's raided, by the way? 14 pages preamble, and then a poem, and then bed. Yeah, Logan, that's what's happening here tonight. All right? It's an hour and 40 minutes in here, mate. I know you Twitter on. This is concentrated reading. It is a brick of a book win. The guy was quite busy, apparently. All right, let's go for it. Ready? The Raven. Divorce. Here we go. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of some gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, "tapping at my chamber door, only this, and nothing more." Ah, distinctly I remember it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow. Vainly I sought to borrow from my book surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenora, for the rare and radiant maiden, whom the angels named Lenora, blameless here for evermore. And the silken sad uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with the fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door, that it is, and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," said I, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore, but the fact is I was napping, so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you. Here I opened wide the door, darkness there, and nothing more." Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortals ever dared to dream before. But the silence was broken, and stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, "Lenore." This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, "Lenore." Merely this, and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning. Soon again I heard a tapping, something louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more." Open here I flung the shutter, when with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with the mien of lord or lady, perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird, beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore. "Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou," I said, "art thou sure no craven, ghastly grim and ancient raving, wandering from the nightly shore? Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." Much I marvelled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answers little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door. Bird or beast upon the sculptured bust above his chamber door, with such a name as Nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on that placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing farther than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, Other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me as many hopes have flown before. Then the bird said, Nevermore. Startled at the stillness broken by replies so aptly spoken, Doubtless, said I, what it utters is its only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master, whom unmerciful disaster followed fast that his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore of never, nevermore. But the raven still beguiling all my sad soul into smiling. Straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and bust and door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking, Nevermore. This I sat engaging and guessing, but no syllable expressing to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight gloated o'er, but those velvet violet lining with the lamplight gloating over, she shall press nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseasoned censer, swung by ferrymen whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee, respite and nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this Lenore. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, whether tempter sent, or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate, yet all undaunted, and this desolate land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if, within distant Aden, it shall clasp a saint maiden whom the angels named Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden whom the angels named Lenore. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. Be that word our sign of parting. Bird or fiend, I shrieked, upstarting, get thee back into the tempest of the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of thy lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken, quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form off from my door. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door. And his eyes have all the seeming of a demon that is dreaming, and the lamplight over him streaming throws his shadow on the floor, and my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. Sorry, I'll have to work out the dynamics of the mic, I guess. Um, Yeah. All right. We got some we got some vibes coming in there. Cool. Well, that was fun. I have to say, I had a little endurance hit in the middle there. I was like, how long am I reading for? But that's all right. Mike jump scares are immersive for Halloween stories. Yeah, I don't know. It's new. It's new. We'll have to work out. Also, I can't. I don't think I can adjust the settings on my phone. So we'll have to get it set up on the laptop properly. Mm. Alison, I'm used to talking endlessly, as some people have been attested to on my tours. Um, we will we won't do this next week. I'm very new to the Twitch thing, so I put this as a weekly event, which it won't be. Because next Thursday I'm going to be with Logan again doing Morrowind. But the week after, we will finish up with uh, that first story, and we've got 12 pages left. We're already 26 in, I think. So we're two-thirds through, which means that we should go on to another short story in there, a couple of poems. The sorrow of the morrow, Morrowind, yes, indeed, lusty Argonian maid. Logan, Hillier, and I are alternating Thursdays. That's the plan. So we will, at the moment, we'll see how it goes when we get closer to Christmas. But we will be doing alternate Thursdays with Morrowind, or maybe something else. We'll see. I'm just not very good at the gaming. Um, he said KCD might be a bit too hard for me at the moment, but we'll see. And the fall of the House of Usher. There will be more for sure. As many Logans as we know, happy it's the Hillier one and not the other. Yeah, the Valier one? Wee, dad joke. Oh, Christmas Carol, yes. Trilogy, in fact. That is a good one, Red J18. I'd not thought about that, and I was thinking Dickens because it's out of copyright. So I can. So one of my I love Conan Doyle, not just Sherlock Holmes. Um, but also he wrote some other stuff, some more medieval stuff. Actually, someone suggested maybe I could read more medieval related. Oh, yeah, Logan Valier. Um, yeah, and at some point I was thinking also I do want to start cooking, so it might be even cooking and then bedtime stories with Dadzig going forward, or cooking one night of the week. And yeah, we'll see. Halloween Carmilla. I don't know what that is. Whoever wrote that. Um, yeah, cooking. Because I don't know about anybody else here. I like to cook, but when I see all this shit on Instagram, like, and they do a recipe and like, it's like 2 minutes. You know, well, how am I supposed to cook that? I mean, if you know how to cook, then you kind of get an idea. But if you don't know how to cook, then it's just frustrating, and you're just seeing these people knocking up these recipes, and you've got no idea what they did. So I want to take that apart because maybe you already cook, or maybe you can't cook. But either way, wouldn't it be interesting to make something simple? The idea is to have something and shove it in the oven, and then do some reading, and then have some dinner afterwards, or you cook it for the next day and you take it to work or whatever it is. Um, Vampire novel. Oh yeah. Mukbang, maybe. Multiple cameras. Oh yeah. Got to have one for the chopping board for sure. Uh, if you want, we all cook together. So the idea, and there will be steak with red wine reduction at some point. But no, but seriously, yeah, cooking together. Because my plan would be to the week before say, hey, we're going to cook this next week, and so everyone can have ingredients ready, and we basically go through it. And if you don't have much experience cooking, I'll talk through it because I've been cooking for a very long time and I like it very much. Cooking club, exactly, exactly. And um, uh, and who doesn't like home cooked food, basically? And it'll be simple. I believe in 20-minute recipes if you know how to do it. But I'm thinking more about like soups or stews or something that will go in a pot that will go in the oven, um, something like that. Yeah, wholesome, hearty autumn winter food. Seeing as with that, is Gemma here as well? Jim cool as well as Mumsvan. Check it out. Who are we judging? Uh, yeah, who are we judging, Wadey? Uh, ooh, chana masala. Yeah, well, there's the thing. We can. That's the other thing. Maybe we can start sharing recipes and stuff. Yeah, exactly. Right, family dinner. Um. Okay. Uh. Oh, chana masala. Oh God, I love food. Oh, gumbo. Oh yeah, dirty rice. We have dirty rice with the gumbo. Um, dirty rice. Oh my God, so good. That's a long time since I made it. I made it for in England once for stifado. Yes. Oh, I've got this recipe for Galician chickpea chorizo stew. Oh my word, that stuff is sound. But I made dirty rice and gumbo for a mate of mine in England. He's from Louisiana, and he was like, I ain't gonna eat it, Maggie, because no offense to you all, but my mama made it at home, and it ain't gonna be as good. And I'm like, come on, but I get it, I guess. A great jar of roux. So sorry, I'm spiking the mic again. Yeah, I haven't had dinner yet, Mars. So, oh, Kool-Aida. Oh, yeah. So much good food, isn't it? And also, I guess it's about using what we've got at home. All right. It is 10:25 for me, and I'm going longer here than I thought. So I'm going to call it a night because I haven't had anything to eat yet. So I would like to have some food. Logan would eat anything, frankly. Smažení sír, vole. Yeah, let's do it. I have a. Let's do it. We're gonna do it. Cool. Going forward, that's the plan. But we'll do reading again in 2 weeks. We'll finish the old Hans Pfaff, and and then we'll get back and we'll plan it forward going on. Amazing. Cheers, guys, for joining. What happened with our thumb there? Cricky thumbs. Thank you. Not night all. There we go. Live is gonna die.